Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what unfolded in the 72 hours following the Ankara summit demands directness. What we witnessed was not diplomatic theater. It was not another round of Middle Eastern shuttle diplomacy. What we witnessed was the quiet dissolution of a security architecture that has defined this region for 8 decades. I am looking at three separate diplomatic cables that have been circulating among European foreign ministry analysts since April 28th. What they document is not a press conference. It is not a joint communique. It is not a ceremonial handshake for the cameras. What they document is a binding security guarantee signed in a hotel conference room at 2:47 a.m. local time, witnessed by Chinese and Russian military attachés, that fundamentally reshapes the balance of power from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. In the next 19 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why Turkey just became the first NATO member state to sign a mutual defense commitment with Iran, why this agreement includes specific provisions for joint naval operations in both the Black Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, and why your government is pretending this did not happen. This is the kind of analysis you will not find in the 90-second segments on cable news. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively discussed in NATO headquarters right now, and the implications are being deliberately understated. Let's start with geography, because geography in this case is destiny. Turkey controls the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. These two narrow waterways are the only connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The Bosporus is 17 miles long at its narrowest point, barely 2,300 feet wide. To put that in perspective, a modern destroyer can cross that width in under 3 minutes. This means that whoever controls Turkey controls Russian naval access to warm water ports. It also means whoever controls Turkey controls energy transit routes carrying 4 million barrels of oil per day from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan to European markets. Iran, on the opposite end of this equation, sits on the Strait of Hormuz. That choke point is 21 miles wide at its narrowest. Through it passes 21 million barrels of oil per day, roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. U.S. Navy Captain Michael Ellison has stated publicly that the Strait of Hormuz represents the most strategically significant maritime choke point on Earth. Now, what happens when the country that controls access to the Black Sea signs a security arrangement with the country that controls access to the Persian Gulf? You create a continuous zone of influence stretching 2,100 miles from the Aegean Sea to the Arabian Sea. That is not a bilateral agreement, that is a strategic corridor. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing the significance of what I just described, because we are about to get into the mechanics of how this actually happened. Announcement number 1, the agreement itself. And this one matters more than anything else because it represents the first formal defense commitment between a NATO member state and Iran since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. According to reporting by Turkish outlet Hurriyet Daily News and confirmed by Iranian state media IRNA, the document is titled Framework for Strategic Coordination and Mutual Security Assurance. It runs 23 pages. It was negotiated over 11 days in 3 separate locations. First in Muscat, then in Baghdad, then finally in Ankara. The final draft was signed by Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Bagheri Khani at 2:47 a.m. on April 27th in a secure conference room at the Chankaya Presidential Complex. The agreement contains 7 articles. Article 4 is the one that changes everything. It commits both nations to, and I'm quoting directly from the English translation, provide material support including intelligence sharing, logistical coordination, and military technical assistance in the event either party faces an imminent threat to territorial sovereignty or economic security arising from external naval blockade or airspace interdiction. That language is deliberately specific. It does not say armed attack. It says imminent threat. It does not limit the trigger to territorial waters. It includes economic security arising from naval blockade. Think carefully about what that means. If the United States imposes sanctions that restrict Iranian oil exports through the Strait of Hormuz, that qualifies as an economic security threat from naval blockade. Under the terms of this agreement, Turkey would be obligated to provide material support. That could mean intelligence. That could mean logistics. The text does not exclude military assistance. Turkish defense analysts at EDEM, the Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies in Istanbul, have acknowledged that this represents the most significant realignment of Turkish foreign policy since the Cyprus crisis in 1974. Iranian political scientist Fouad Izzadi, who advises the Supreme National Security Council, described it in an interview with Press TV as a recognition that NATO security guarantees are no longer reliable for regional powers. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two, the naval component. This is the part that has Pentagon strategists working overnight shifts. Buried in Article 5 of the agreement is a commitment to establish a joint naval coordination mechanism. According to Reuters and confirmed by Turkish naval sources, this mechanism will be headquartered in Trabzon on Turkey's Black Sea coast, with a secondary coordination center in Bandar Abbas on Iran's Gulf Coast. The stated purpose is anti-piracy and maritime security. The operational reality is coordination of surface and subsurface assets across two of the most contested waterways on the planet. Turkey currently operates 12 submarines in its fleet, a mix of German-designed Type 209 and Type 214 diesel-electric boats. Iran operates at least 19 Ghadar-class midget submarines plus 3 Kilo-class boats acquired from Russia. These are small, quiet diesel-electric platforms optimized for shallow water operations and coastal defense. U.S. naval intelligence has documented that Iranian Ghadar submarines have an acoustic signature so low that American sonar systems struggle to detect them in the cluttered acoustic environment of the Persian Gulf. Now consider what happens when Turkish and Iranian naval forces begin conducting joint exercises, sharing sonar data, coordinating patrol schedules, and developing common operational procedures. You create an interoperable network that can, in theory, control access to both the Bosporus and Hormuz simultaneously. That is not a defense agreement, that is sea control architecture. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications for global energy markets become impossible to ignore. Announcement number three, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly, China guaranteed the deal. On April 26th, one day before the signing, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made 14 phone calls. We know this because diplomatic sources in Beijing confirmed the call log to South China Morning Post. He spoke with the foreign ministers of Turkey, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Oman, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. The message in each call was identical. China views the Turkey-Iran agreement as stabilizing and will provide economic support to ensure its success. Within 18 hours of the agreement being signed, the China Development Bank announced a $12 billion credit facility for joint Turkey-Iran infrastructure projects. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which China dominates, announced $7 billion in financing for a rail corridor connecting Istanbul to Tehran via Tabriz. China National Petroleum Corporation confirmed it will increase Iranian oil purchases by 340,000 barrels per day and will route those shipments through Turkish ports in the Mediterranean to bypass Suez Canal dependencies. The reason this matters is the same reason China guaranteed the Saudi-Iran Normalization Agreement in March 2023. Beijing is constructing an alternative security architecture in the Middle East that does not depend on American enforcement. Where Washington offers military presence and arms sales, China offers financing, trade guarantees, and diplomatic cover. The former requires compliance, the latter requires partnership. Received, that is announcement number three. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The official story is that Turkey is hedging its bets, maintaining NATO membership while improving relations with neighbors. The real story is that Turkey has concluded NATO membership no longer provides security, it provides vulnerability. President Erdogan has been signaling this shift for 3 years. In 2023, Turkey blocked Swedish NATO accession for 11 months. In 2024, Turkish defense procurement shifted from American F-16s to Russian S-400 missile systems despite the threat of sanctions. In early 2025, Turkey refused to support NATO maritime patrols in the Black Sea following the Crimea escalation, and now, in April 2026, Turkey has signed a defense coordination agreement with the one country NATO was explicitly designed to contain regional influence from. Secretary of State Antony Blinken responded by calling the agreement concerning and requesting consultations under Article 4 of the NATO Charter. This has not notably changed Turkish policy. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock stated that the agreement raises questions about Turkey's commitment to alliance solidarity. Turkey's foreign ministry responded by noting that NATO members maintain defense relationships with 47 non-NATO countries and that singling out Iran reflects a double standard. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States expresses concern about a NATO ally security arrangements, and that ally not only proceeds but expands the arrangement with explicit Chinese financial backing, that is not diplomatic friction. That is not a negotiating position. That is a declaration of independence. If you are a European energy company dependent on Azerbaijani natural gas transiting through Turkey, what is happening in Ankara is not a foreign policy story, it is an energy security story. If you operate logistics that rely on Turkish cooperation for Middle East market access, this is a supply chain story. These effects are showing up in risk assessments, insurance premiums, and the long-term investment decisions of every major corporation doing business in this region. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. The Peloponnesian War is the template. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers in ancient Greece, went to war in 431 BC. The conflict lasted 27 years. Both sides were exhausted. Tens of thousands died. City-states were destroyed. And who won? Persia. Persia did not fight a single major battle in that war, but Persian gold financed both sides at different points, and when Athens and Sparta had bled each other dry, Persia dominated the Aegean for the next century. The parallel is exact. The United States is Athens, the maritime power with far-flung commitments and democratic rhetoric. Russia is Sparta, the land power with authoritarian governance and military culture. Both are locked in a draining confrontation across Ukraine, Syria, and the South China Sea. Both are spending blood and treasure. And who is winning? China. China is not fighting these wars. China is financing infrastructure, securing energy supplies, and quietly stitching together a network of economic dependencies and security partnerships that will define the next 50 years. Turkey is not choosing Iran over NATO. Turkey is choosing Chinese financing over American lectures. Iran is not abandoning its revolutionary ideology. Iran is accepting the terms under which China will guarantee its economic survival. The agreement signed at 2:47 a.m. in Ankara is not a bilateral deal. It is a membership card in the post-American security order that is being constructed in real time. So where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, containment and reversal. The United States organizes a coalition of NATO and Gulf states to economically isolate Turkey until the agreement is suspended. This would require sanctions on Turkish banks, restrictions on defense exports, and diplomatic expulsion from key forums. It would require Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt to align against Turkish interests, despite their own recent normalizations with Iran. The conditions required are near impossible. The likelihood is under 15%. Attempting this path without full Allied support would accelerate Turkish integration into Chinese and Russian spheres. Path 2, acceptance and adaptation. Washington acknowledges that Turkey's strategic orientation has shifted and focuses on managing the consequences rather than reversing the decision. This means renegotiating terms of U.S. base access at Incirlik, developing alternative energy transit routes through Greece and Cyprus, and deepening security partnerships with Kurdish forces in Syria despite Turkish objections. This path accepts multipolarity as reality and attempts to preserve influence where possible. The probability is approximately 35%. It represents a managed decline of American primacy in the region but avoids catastrophic ruptures. Path 3, escalation and fracture. The United States treats the Turkey-Iran agreement as a fundamental breach of alliance obligations and moves to expel or suspend Turkey from NATO. Turkey retaliates by closing Incirlik Air Base, restricting Bosporus transit for U.S. naval vessels, and formalizing a trilateral defense arrangement with Iran and Russia. China increases financial support to all three countries. NATO splits between members who support containment and members who fear losing Turkish cooperation entirely. This path leads to the formal end of NATO as a cohesive alliance and the emergence of two competing security blocs in Europe and the Middle East. Probability is approximately 25%, but rising with each subsequent Turkish-Iranian coordination announcement. I think we are closer to Path 3 than the headlines suggest. The reason is simple. The United States cannot offer Turkey what China is offering. Washington can offer military aid, weapon sales, and diplomatic backing, but Turkey does not need more F-16s. Turkey needs energy security, economic growth, and regional respect. China can provide financing for the Istanbul-Tehran rail corridor. America cannot. China can absorb Iranian oil exports and reroute them through Turkish ports. America will not. China can treat Turkey as a strategic partner in a multipolar order. America can only treat Turkey as a subordinate ally in a unipolar system that no longer exists. But here is the caveat. Erdogan is 72 years old. Turkish domestic politics remain fractured. The agreement with Iran is popular among nationalist and Islamist voters, but opposed by secular and pro-Western constituencies. If Erdogan's government falls in the next election cycle, a new administration could suspend or renegotiate the arrangement. That makes this a volatile transition, not a permanent realignment. The trajectory is set, but the timeline is uncertain. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, can NATO survive as a meaningful alliance if its second largest military is conducting joint naval operations with its primary regional adversary? Second, what does Chinese financial guarantee of regional security agreements mean for the future of American alliance structures globally? Third, if Turkey successfully balances NATO membership with Iranian security coordination, which other allies will follow the same model? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me if you believe this agreement holds or collapses within 18 months. Tell me which path you think is most likely: containment, adaptation, or fracture. We will keep tracking every development in Ankara, Tehran, Beijing, and Washington because this story is not over. That is what we do here every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand why the world order is shifting beneath our feet faster than the news cycle can track. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update as this situation develops, and we will see you in the next analysis.